When Rise of the TMNT was first being developed, showrunners Andy Suriano and Ant Ward were invited to read what Brandon Auman had originally pitched, and then asked to salvage whatever they felt could work and build their own version from there. What caught their attention was the concept of the Hidden City, a secret world where mutants lived beneath the surface, away from human eyes. It reminded them of the underground tunnels from Big Trouble in Little China, except instead of going the monster route, they leaned into worldwide folklore creatures, most notably the yokai. The yokai were supernatural entities from Japanese folklore. One of the most captivating of these creatures was the Jorogumo, known today in the West as the Entangling Bride. According to legend, when a golden orb weaver spider reached 400 years of age, it developed magical powers and began feeding on human prey instead of insects. Among those powers was the ability to transform into a beautiful young woman, a form she used to lure in unsuspecting men. Suriano and Ward were drawn to this creature as one of the series' main antagonists, and to shape her character, they borrowed from two very specific sources: the cold, ruthless Mama from the 2012 film Dread, and the cheerfully unhinged Mary Poppins. The joke, of course, was that Big Mama would speak entirely in made-up words and whimsical nonsense, completely undercutting any sense of menace that her monstrous true form might otherwise carry. And since the character was already borrowing from Mama, they went ahead and cast the same actress, Game of Thrones alum Lena Headey. It was her offbeat, nutty sense of humor that made the Mary Poppins-style delivery feel so right. Join me today as I explore Big Mama and just how faithful she is to the yokai legend that inspired her. Like the Jorogumo of legend, Big Mama ensnared men. But she did it differently. Rather than relying purely on her beauty, she offered something more intoxicating: glory, fame, and the chance to prove yourself as a champion. This deviation from the source material was a meaningful one, and a smart update for a modern audience. In the context of Edo period Japan, the Jorogumo myth was rooted in anxiety about female power and autonomy. Like many mythological monsters across cultures, she was female, powerful, self-sufficient, and answered to no one. An independent woman with her own resources and appetites was inherently threatening in that society, and the myth existed to reinforce that message. In this context, female independence was inherently dangerous. The show wisely left that baggage behind, letting Big Mama be charming, cool, and genuinely threatening without leaning on those misogynistic roots. Still, some threads from the original legend remained. Splinter, also known as Hamato Yoshi, was a martial arts actor who went by the name of Lu Jitsu, and he fell for the most traditional temptation of the Jorogumo, her beauty. He met Big Mama while filming Crouching Shrimp, Hidden Tiger Prawn, back when she was working as the teamster who drove his trailer. For him, it was love at first sight. They spent their courtship mostly dancing, which, as it happens, is something Jorogumo were also known to do with their victims. He eventually proposed, and that was when she dropped the act and revealed what she actually was. She kidnapped him into the Hidden City and forced him to fight in the Battle Nexus. Something that, to be fair, Yoshi seemed to enjoy for a while. He had been drawn in by her beauty before she ever made him her champion, but once inside her world, his hunger for fighting and fame slowly weakened, just as it did for the Jorogumo's prey in those old stories. She was able to do this, in part, because Yoshi was already isolated in his own way, estranged from his family, sealed inside the bubble of fame, and with no one close enough to notice something was wrong. In the original folklore, the one thing that made a man immune to the Jorogumo's power was true love. A man whose heart was already claimed simply wouldn't be tempted. And that's exactly what freed Yoshi. After escaping and later being used by Baron Draxum to engineer the perfect warriors, Yoshi became a father. His love for his 4 sons turned out to be the very thing that broke whatever hold Big Mama still had over him. The Battle Nexus has appeared across many corners of the Turtleverse, and the IDW version was recently back in the spotlight with the Battle Nexus miniseries. In that story, it was revealed that Big Mama sat on the Dimensional Council that organized the tournament every 12 cycles. However, while that Big Mama is still the same character we're discussing here, the Battle Nexus she oversees in that continuity is a very different place from the one introduced in Rise. In this show, the Battle Nexus exists inside the hidden city itself. You may ask yourself, what does Big Mama gain from seducing others with the promise of glory, freedom, and wealth? Where the Jorogumo in legend would simply feed on her victims, Big Mama was running a business. She exploited her champions for profit, and that wealth fed her power. She also seemed to genuinely enjoy the act of collecting and using others. The Battle Nexus, then, is this show's version of the Jorogumo's lair, the place where her victims would spend a slow, drawn-out death. But the nature of that death here works on a different level. The Battle Nexus and the Hidden City are extensions of those liminal spaces where the Jorogumo would often set up her lair. In this final stage, her victim wasn't just psychologically isolated, there was also a physical, more dangerous element to it. The original seduction, of course, was sexual desire. In Edo period Japan, men were considered too weak to resist a woman's beauty. If a man was destroyed by a Jorogumo, he had no one to blame but himself. The men who survived were usually the ones who noticed something was off before they were completely cut off from the outside world. Sometimes it was a stranger who spotted the warning signs and intervened. In either case, having one's heart already claimed by someone was the surest protection against her. Splinter managed to escape from her webs, and he stayed safe thanks to his newfound obligation to his children, but what about his sons? Would they be able to resist the temptations of a Jorogumo? The Turtles first crossed paths with Big Mama when they wandered into the Grand Nexus Hotel while hunting Uskitos. She introduced herself, explained the concept of Yokai, and painted her hotel as a luxury getaway for creatures like them, a place to relax while watching the Battle Nexus competitions. She offered them her silk web to capture the Uskitos, framing the whole thing as a favor. She needed them gone before the mutants drew unwanted attention to the yokai community. Just like in the old legends, 3 of the turtles believed every word of it, especially once she started complimenting their skills and intelligence. What the turtles needed more than almost anything in their lives was recognition from an adult, and Big Mama knew exactly how to hand that to them. Leonardo, though, saw through it. He couldn't quite put his finger on what was wrong, but something felt off, and he trusted that feeling. It all turned out to be a setup to recruit new warriors for the Battle Nexus. She also planned on capturing the turtles, so she sent her big dog Gus after them. They almost broke free, mostly because Big Mama had gotten overconfident. In the end, it was an outside disruption from Baron Draxum that gave the turtles the opening they needed, which mirrors the old folklore tales, where it was sometimes an outside figure who broke the Jorogumo's hold. Like the legendary creature she was based on, Big Mama loved to dance. That particular pastime had an interesting effect on the people around her. As long as she was entertained, she seemed able to set aside her more predatory instincts. That was true with Yoshi, and it was true with Bullhop. Dancing kept her victims safe, at least temporarily. The turtles continued ruining her plans and stealing from her, which only seemed to push her into even more evil schemes. One of her more humiliating defeats was probably the time the Turtles and Splinter went against her in her own demolition derby. In the old legends, a Jorogumo could command spiders with her magic, bending them to her will. Big Mama had her own version of this ability, but she made the mistake of badly misjudging who the real apex predator was. It started when she acquired a mystic orb from Baron Draxum, in exchange for letting him use her train to transport the components of the dark armor. That deal set in motion the Shredder's return. Leo and Splinter went to Big Mama for help, not yet realizing they were playing right into her plans. The Shredder wasn't fully anchored to this dimension, and Big Mama offered to deal with him. But there was a condition. They had to fight in the battle Nexus first. Leo arranged the whole thing masterfully, even managing to do it without weapons, and he even anticipated that Big Mama would change the rules at the last minute. With this, Leo proved to be as smart as Big Mama when it came to tempting others. After their triumph, Big Mama offered to dispose of the Shredder and return him to the prison dimension he came from. But, of course, she changed the rules of their agreement again, without them knowing. Convinced she was dealing with a lesser being she could control, she turned the Shredder into her latest champion, the Shadow Fiend. She then used the mystic orb to trap all the citizens of New York inside it, leaving the city deserted to run her Battle Nexus New York, where she would put the Turtles against her champions. The rules were simple. They had to defeat her champions to get their city back, or lose it all. Despite defeating her champions, Big Mama changed the rules once again. She decided she liked having an entire city as her arena, and she intended to keep it, along with its kidnapped population, as her expendable contestants. This was a striking inversion of the liminal space element from the Jorogumo myth. The small, contained space, in this case the mystic orb itself, had become the only truly safe place. Meanwhile, the entire city had become her lair. In terms of raw power, Big Mama had achieved something no ordinary Jorogumo ever had. Perhaps for a good reason. The Turtles tried to resist, but Big Mama unleashed the Shadow Fiend. His sheer destructive force cracked the mystic orb, and that crack was just enough for Draxum, April, Splinter, and the Foot Recruit to escape. When the Recruit realized the Shadow Fiend was the Shredder himself, she snatched the ring Big Mama was using to control him and turned him against his enemies. Big Mama ended up buried under the ruins of the Grand Nexus Hotel in very poor shape, and with no control over the expanded empire she had spent so much effort building. She had made a serious mistake, one that the classic Jorogumo rarely committed. She had underestimated her prey. While she was still recovering, the Turtles came back to her for help. The Shredder was threatening to take Splinter's life force, and they needed answers. Big Mama, who clearly had some feelings for Splinter, realized that the key to extracting a life force was to harness the very source of Yokai power, the Empyrean. Knowing where to find it, she sent them to one of the most sacred places in the hidden city, the Crying Titan. Using the Hamato Ninpo, the Turtles and their extended family defeated the Shredder, and with the city finally safe, the citizens of New York were freed. Given that Big Mama holds a seat on the Dimensional Council, it's reasonable to assume she returned to her place in the hidden city. And having learned from this mistake, it's safe to say she came back even more careful and dangerous than ever. It's hard to know exactly what Big Mama's role would have been in the cancelled third season. The second season was cut short, forcing the creative team to compress its back half into just a few episodes. In their original plans, Big Mama would have kidnapped the Shadow Fiend again, with only the Foot Recruit knowing he was really the Shredder. This would have built toward a major confrontation, as Big Mama moved to seize ultimate power over the hidden city. There was also a revelation waiting in the wings. A recurring character on Big Mama's staff, her quiet assistant, would have turned out to be a turtle. Not just any turtle, but one of the 6 who had been mutated using Yoshi's DNA. This would have opened the gates to exploring the differences between being raised by Splinter and Big Mama. The Turtles grew up in a warm, messy, chaotic household where they were allowed to be themselves and enjoy their own sense of freedom. Big Mama's assistant, by contrast, would have grown up shaped by a cruel, narcissistic figure. Would she have become silent and obedient, always careful not to trigger her mother's anger? Or would she be as deadly as a Jorogumo? She was a teenage turtle, of course, so a classic Jorogumo seduction tactic was unlikely. As adaptations from classic myths go, Big Mama was a faithful one. Certain elements were softened for a younger audience, the Mary Poppins speech being the most obvious example, but she retained the essential nature of the Jorogumo as a threat. Especially because once you fell into her web, getting out was almost impossible. But it's worth mentioning that Big Mama seemed to have some sort of romantic feeling for Splinter, indicating that, under all her cruelness, she was still able to experience some feelings. This was perhaps a result of living for thousands of years alone, or maybe because she raised his daughter. Not strong enough to redeem herself, but mild enough to help Splinter in a moment of crisis. These were elements that the writers built upon the established myths of the Jorogumo. While the times have changed, one could say that the Jorogumo has been replaced by similar anxieties. Social media now does what she did, trapping us in its webs, isolating us from the world beyond the screen, and keeping us scrolling long past the point where we meant to stop. It seems like we ended up creating our own Jorogumo. What are your thoughts on this legend? And do you think Big Mama was a worthy addition to the turtle mythos? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you in the sewers.